Well, after getting out of seeing Megalopolis, I had one thought. That's probably the worst movie I've ever seen. Now I'm going to attempt to give you a quick summary of this movie. It's going to be difficult, but I'm going to try and do it. First, we have Adam Driver's character, Caesar Catalina. He's a pretentious artist that wants to turn New Rome into a utopia. Never really factors into the plot at all, but yeah, he can stop time. Next, we have Franklin Cicero, which is played by Giancarlo Esposito. He's like, oh, the way things are in New Rome is just perfect and fine the way it is. Then you have his daughter, Julia Cicero. She falls in love with the main character, and this kind of creates tension between them. Then we have Claudio Pulcher. He's like a chaos agent, and he sort of just wants power for power's sake and doesn't really have any true ideology. So also we have a character named, okay, let me see if I get this right. Wow Platinum. Okay, interesting. Not a very Roman name, but whatever. Played by Aubrey Plaza, and she's sort of this social climber reporter type who uses seduction to get power. So basically, the way this story goes is everyone tries to fight over what the future of New Rome is going to be, but in the end, the main character stands on some big object, makes a speech, and everyone has a conversation about what the utopia will be, and then we live in a utopia. But yeah, that's the story. First thing I needed to figure out is Francis Ford Coppola okay? Is he all right? So I went and looked at interviews of him. I was expecting some sort of like weird pretentious interviews like, oh, I did it because it's deep and it's real and it's art, man. But instead what you ended up with was actually a guy that seemed pretty nice. Also, just the confidence of him to, you know, release this movie with his own money and sell his own winery. It's just very inspiring to me. I also love how his whole idea for the movie was that, hey, let's create a discussion about what society we can have. And every year people will watch it and will continually improve society, and then maybe one day we'll be in a utopia.
If we're really geniuses, which I'm sure we are,
sure, yeah,
then there's nothing we can't solve. And so therefore the world could be a joyous place of us just basically being creative together instead of all of this misery and death that we're seeing.
He said some things also that could be interesting themes in a movie if executed properly.
Basically what we are living in a world of unfulfilled people. In other words, people we spend $7 trillion or more on advertising, selling the idea of happiness. Well, if your business is to sell a little bit of happiness, the people you're selling to can't be happy. They have to be unhappy.
There were also some things that caused some worry. That was like, ooh, this might be the seeds of what's wrong here. He said something kind of ironic, but he said when he made The Godfather, he sort of became his character of Michael Corleone. And this will play in later in the video.
What I did is I became very Machiavellian. In other words, I tricked them into letting me have Brando. I tricked them. So in a sense, I turned into Michael Corleone. And I was that kind of Machiavellian guy, just like Michael was as he takes over.
Also, there was this moment where he was talking about how in the movie, like, there was this scene where he's like, okay, to practice the scene, we're going to have this imaginary rope. And they just kept that. They kept it.
So I said, let's do an imaginary rope. And let's have this imaginary rope, and you're holding it, and it's sort of tied to him, or he's holding it, and let's do a few takes like that. So we did a few takes where she was holding him, and he was like going like that and stuff. But I was just doing it for the actors to get into the groove, and then we said, okay, now let's not do that. Let's just do a scene where you're just following him. But when we looked at the footage together, we saw the one with the imaginary rope, and we said, let's do more like that. That's sort of fun, and let's not do the normal. So the movie started making itself.
Another thing that kind of raised alarm bells is he talked about like, oh, everyone's politically different, but if we all get in the same room and we talk to each other, things will work themselves out.
But I saw that in casting too. Like I saw people on, you want to talk about like being an incredibly polarized society right now and people not being able to have conversations. I saw people on the extreme, like people who are deep Trump supporters, like John Boyd, very deep Trump supporter. I saw folks who are, very, very progressive. And so I ended up reading about it and reading about your decision. It was intentional to have people from different
sides. Because we were above politics.
Yeah.
We were all working together, enjoying each other.
How did that go? What were the conversations
We were
like?
all working together, enjoying it. This film is a collaboration. And that's one of the reasons it's as nutty as it is.
One of the people in this movie is John Boyd.
This is now our greatest fight since the Civil War. The battle of righteousness versus Satan. Yes, Satan. Because these leftists are evil. And fight now for Trump's victory because we all know this ballot count is corruption like they are.
Discussing the issues doesn't matter if one person's crazy and one's not, one person's right and then one person's wrong, and sometimes compromise is a bad thing, and sometimes you need to have the conflict. This makes the incoherence make so much sense. One of the first things that's very obvious is that this film has very pretentious film student gimmicks. There's this one scene, I kid you not, where there's non-stop Dutch angles. Also, there's this like trippy scene, and it just kept going on and on and on. And I think I checked my watch 3 times. Another weird thing about this movie, a lot of people just hanging out. There's a Dustin Hoffman character, he whispers all his dialogue. He could probably be removed from the final cut and you wouldn't even notice. There's a Chloe Fineman character that just kind of dances around. You could remove her and nothing would happen. Jason Schwartzman's apparently in this movie. I don't even remember like his role in the movie, what he did. Probably the funniest thing, and this is probably just a me thing, but there's this framing device. So Lawrence Fishburne is narrating the whole story, but it's never clear why he's the narrator. I guess it's just done to be artsy. Another thing is that like all of the actors seem to be in a different movie. Adam Driver was taking this extremely seriously. Then you have Natalie Emmanuel doing a low-key, almost like drama film. Then you have Aubrey Plaza and Shia LaBeouf who are over the top and theatrical, doing a performance. But it's just so jarring because everyone's acting very differently in the movie. A lot of these sort of on the surface things though, I don't think ruin a movie exactly. The next thing I want to look at is just the incomprehensible things happen plot. It feels like 90% of what happens in this story has no consequence to the overall plot. So there's this one storyline where a virgin woman is auctioned off that ends up not being a virgin, but that ends up being a deepfake. You're asking me, how does this factor into the overall plot? I could not tell you. Another thing is the main character gets shot in the head, literally through the eye. Such a big event had no impact on the plot. It's crazy. Last but not least, a big satellite just crashes down in New Rome and destroys a bunch of stuff. This satellite crashing, it's just a nothing event. One of the things that does get complimented about this movie is the aesthetic, the cool artsy way it looks. But to me, it's one of the biggest problems I have with the movie, even bigger than the plot. Honestly, most of the settings in this movie are just half-baked ideas or cliches. If you really think about it, it's like, wow, this makes no sense. One of the funniest things is this clock. It's on top of a building, but it faces straight up. So I don't know who's supposed to be reading this clock, except maybe people on helicopters or people standing on it. It has no numbers on it. So like, I just don't understand. Another location is he's just sitting on scaffolding. It's just like dangerous and unnecessary, but it looks cool. Probably the worst offender because it's so important to the story is the utopia that it shows you. First of all, it's super sterile. Literally nothing going on, no real personality to it. You have gerbil ball transportation system. And then last but not least, there's like orange escalators everywhere. Like, oh, in the future, you don't have to walk. Everywhere is like the Atlanta airport. Why is it a utopian thing to have orange escalators everywhere? When I started looking at the characters though, I think I started to get an inkling of what was so annoying to me about this movie. So the characterization was just bizarre and like there was no choice of direction here. Also, like characters have these awkward moments where like what they do is so bizarre you don't even know what the tone's supposed to be. Basically, Shia LaBeouf takes over the bank using Aubrey Plaza as a way of doing it. The John Voight character has this moment where he's dying on his deathbed with a boner. Then both the characters walk closer, then they figure out that it is not a boner but a novelty tiny crossbow, like something you would get at Halloween City. And then he like gets out the bow and arrow and he shoots Aubrey Plaza in the heart, and then he shoots Shia LaBeouf in the butt cheeks. Just a bizarre scene. Last but not least, we have a lot of the characters all of a sudden turn into surrogates to show you how smart Francis Ford Coppola is.
And you think 1 year of medical school entitles you to plow through the riches of my Emersonian mind?
Perfect example of this is Adam Driver's character goes into a soliloquy or a monologue from Shakespeare, but it drags on for like 4 minutes, it felt like. Francis Ford Coppola is, this is going to shock you, but there's an even worse scene than that. There's a scene between the Giancarlo Esposito character and the Adam Driver character where literally they have like a Marcus Aurelius quote off, and that one felt like it lasted like an hour. Literally, like they would go back and forth with Marcus Aurelius quotes, proving if either a utopia or practical society would look like. Adam Driver character wins because he has more Marcus Aurelius quotes in his back pocket. But then when I started thinking about characters being an audience surrogate to Francis Ford Coppola, it then dawned on me what was wrong with this movie. He talked about how like the main characters of his movies became surrogates for him. So just like how Francis Ford Coppola decided to be a tortured artist for this movie, the main character is a tortured artist for this utopia. Obviously, the parallels you can see. Now I realize what was so offensive to me about the movie. It wanted to start this conversation, but with nothing to say. First of all, he was so pliable with the changes that it kind of shows that this has no ideological core. This kind of gets into the next problem, which is it's so worried to not offend people that it doesn't actually have an idea for a utopia. Its ideological core is not having an ideological core. The thing is, I do agree with Francis Ford Coppola in that there is no problem we can't solve, and that the horrors of this world are unnecessary, and that we live in a world full of unfulfilled people. I also agree that we need to talk about systems. Systems are very, very important, but he needs a little more of that Michael Corleone back. If he wants Megalopolis to be a movie that everyone talks about every year and talk about how a system or a society should function, it needs to actually have coherent ideas about that, and then people can discuss whether they agree, disagree, and perhaps at least it starts the conversation. Now that movie would be a movie people would talk about for years and years to come.